welcome to Presence, Healing and Purpose, conversations that inspire positive change in your world. This is the first episode of Presence, Healing and Purpose, hopefully the first of many. And for my guest today, I have Lisa Brown, who I'll tell you a little bit about in a moment. But first, I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on at the moment. So this is Bundjalung Country, and I want to pay my honours and respects to their elders and their customs, past, present and emerging. So Lisa is a registered psychologist, a yoga teacher, certified mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher, a trained mindfulness self-compassion facilitator, and a grandmother. She's an adjunct lecturer at Charles Sturt University, where she has taught mindfulness and facilitated retreats for postgraduate students, and has a deep interest in the conjunction of Western science, Buddhadharma, and earth-based wisdom traditions in health, healing, and trauma recovery. Her teachers include John Kabat-Zinn, Saki Santarelli of the Centre for Mindfulness, and Lama Tenda of the Medicine Buddha Centre in Victoria. Lisa is currently a student in the Insight Meditation Dharma Teacher Training Program in Australia and works in private practice, facilitating groups and workshops on Bundjalung Country, Coffs Harbour. Lisa writes, I find immense joy in being a grandmother and connecting with beauty through poetry, music, art, community, and the beautiful Bundjalung Country, where I'm blessed to live and work. It is my aspiration to contribute as part of a collective to a future where we remember our potential as human beings and our interconnectedness with all things to allow for the healing of relationship with ourselves, each other, and the rivers, oceans, land, and sky. So today I'm going to be talking with Lisa about mindfulness and psychotherapy, and I really hope you enjoy this. So welcome, Lisa. I will have had a introduction for you for this before we've spoke, but it's good to have you here, and thanks for coming on this podcast with me today.
Thanks, Mike. It's really great to see you again, and it's a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got a few questions for you, but we can go anywhere we want to. The general theme of what we're doing is we're going to be looking at mindfulness and psychotherapy. And I thought that I would start off with the easiest question. Who are you? Is that the easiest question?
That's a very many layered question. So I could ask you, which version would you like? Probably, the easiest version is, if we're using water as an analogy, this is the top of the surface. Part is that I'm Lisa. I'm a grandmother. I'm really lucky in my work to work as a psychologist and yoga teacher and mindfulness teacher. And I'm part of an amazing Dharma teacher training program through Insight Meditation Australia at the moment, which is really inspiring and really wonderful.
I've heard about that. Yeah, it sounds amazing.
Yeah, like it is. It's excellent. Yeah. Beautiful. So that's the surface part.
Cool. Maybe we might leave some of the deeper layers of the ocean till a bit later if we have time.
Sure.
So what would you say I haven't gone through in too much detail every nuance of your path, but maybe you could just share a little bit about how you ended up doing the work with the Dharma and mindfulness work and psychology, and what was kind of most influential for you on that path.
Yeah, sure. So I think probably my connection to mindfulness and later on the Dharma came through my own pain and suffering and burnout. As a psychologist, I was working in the sexual assault service in Dubbo, which is a part of New South Wales where there's so much suffering, social injustice and racial injustice. And I think looking back, it was almost like it was really difficult to struggle with the normalization of violence within services and the hopelessness that came with that, Mike, too, of probably not having the inner resources myself or the inner tools to deal with the pain, to actually be present in those spaces where those things were happening. So that coincided with, I'd always had my own yoga practice. Living in Dubbo, we used to do it by cassettes because there were no yoga teachers out there.
Wow.
Yeah, it coincided with when John Kabat-Zinn and Saki Santarelli came to Australia, and that was really profoundly life-changing. So there were 150 health workers, and we spent a week with them down at Collaroy, which was, just really profound. And I think understanding that there was a different way that we could work, and it really, for me, it was the first first introduction to the Dharma as this profound pathway, or like what I know now of a roadmap to help us as humans to deal with our own fragility and pain, and then to be able to be of benefit to the people that we're working with. So
yeah. Absolutely. And I can really relate to what you said there. I remember working in the out-of-home care industry as well, and being kind of blown away at seeing, it's kind of like you get this sneak peek to these elements of society that, well, at least in my life, I'd been sheltered to some degree. And it's like this rude awakening of, wow. And then you have to find a way to somehow keep on going and not have that just like bowl you over completely.
Yeah, absolutely. And like it's profound, I think. But in order to do that, perhaps we had to go through our own transformation to get to that place. And it's such an ongoing journey of practice, and not always getting it right, but just sort of, I think that's where the Dharma's been incredibly helpful, just as a place to come back to.
Can I ask, what was it like working with John Kabat-Zinn and doing that work initially? What was your experience there?
It was amazing. I'd never been to a silent retreat before, and it was really extraordinary, Mike, because John and Saki were known to the world through their work and I'd read all their books and things. But I think what was really extraordinary was witnessing their humanity. So they, for 7 days, they meditated, they lived, they ate, they engaged with us, like from a really deep place of authenticity and from their hearts. So that was quite profound. Just in witnessing. And like I said, there were 150 of us at that training. So felt like a beautiful melting pot where there were quite profound things that happened, and it's been really beautiful watching other people who went through that training, watching how profoundly we were changed, I think, and watching how things developed from there.
Yeah, amazing. It's quite a different experience to have to be that intimate with the people that you're working with for so long, for a 7-day period. It's quite different to someone showing up in the therapy room for an hour and having that experience with them. And I know that you do work on retreat as well. Maybe you could speak to a little bit about how you manage and to go through that much intimacy for longer periods of time whilst holding a healing space.
Yeah, look, and that's a really good point that you raised, because it wasn't a part of my training. It almost felt like, as therapists, there was we were encouraged to sit in the therapist's seat. I think the difference with this work is, and certainly that was what I learned from John and Saki, was how do we show up as human beings for each other, that you know, we might not be perfect, but within our imperfections, kind of that's often where we connect. And I think look, it's a great point too, because it's where the training, the mindfulness training, becomes really important. That we, you know, that work comes from our own practice. It doesn't actually come from an intellectual understanding of what we're doing. So yeah, you know, and it's an ongoing journey too. But to answer your question about retreats, I think it's such a privilege to be in those spaces with, you know, the people that we're working with, which are sometimes may be clients that I'm working with individually, people that we haven't met before, but there's something, you know, where we can still maintain our ethical boundaries and protect our clients, but still show up, you know, in a more authentic way ourselves.
So it's like what you mentioned before. It's almost like that's the permission. Like if you're still holding a big boundary, like a big professional boundary, and you're with people and asking them to go to that next layer of authenticity and show up, it's kind of hard to do that unless you're actually available in that way on that level as well, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think, you know, that speaks a lot of the, you know, the work around kind of empathic distress versus, you know, being able to cultivate compassion actually allows people to almost flourish in those difficult spaces, which that's so fascinating. But in order to do that as healthcare workers, we have to practice ourselves. We have to, you know, have those skills and tools, and, you know, to be able to have done our own inner work as well. Which is important.
It's essential, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and an ongoing work in progress too.
Totally. So let's get to something that might be obvious to some and not obvious to other, but maybe if we could just speak to a little bit about what is mindfulness and what is psychotherapy.
So mindfulness, do you want to answer that?
Maybe you could.
So look, you know, there are many definitions of mindfulness. I think as time's gone on, for me, are probably the definition that really speaks to me is about being present in each moment with not only awareness, but also with compassion, with kindness, and underpinned by a really strong ethical foundation as well. I think, you know, we've seen a lot of mindfulness practices be very watered down, you know, because there's not that connection to the ethical foundation, which is perhaps the Dharma. So that's mindfulness, and as I understand it, psychotherapy is you know, therapeutic practices of being in spaces with people where we're supporting transformation physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And that psychotherapy has had a real journey from, you know, behaviorism of the 1950s to a far more integrative, trauma-aware kind of approach that we're seeing today. Going back even further, you know, to psychoanalysis and Freud and things. So I think we're living through really extraordinary times where, you know, there's emerging of ancient wisdom with the science, and, you know, that is recognizing that actually what we're doing is supporting people to connect with their own inner resources for healing and health. That's not an external thing, it's actually internal. So so it's great. It's a real privilege.
It's amazing, actually. I remember when I was doing my counselling degree, and I knew that there was all of these different modalities, and I remember being told something like there's over 400, and it might even be more now, but like different modalities. And it's not just kind of, I think some of the stigma that comes forward these days with psychotherapy, counselling, getting therapy, there's this idea of kind of there's something wrong with you when you're lying down in a chair with someone taking notes. And I think a lot of people that don't have people around them or haven't experienced it for themselves, it would be very easy for them to not see that. Because even myself, I'd had therapy, I'd studied, I'd done lots of different personal work, and then I was shown like there's dance therapy, sound therapy, movement therapy, somatic therapy, psychedelic therapy. It's almost like there's no point in categorizing anymore. It's just like, what would you say it is, rather than me say, what would you say it is, considering there's all these different ways that you can show up therapeutically? What's the necessary component that makes it therapeutic?
Yeah, great question. Excellent question. I think it's the quality of presence that lies, really at the heart of the therapeutic relationship, and that's a really, I think we can get so tangled up in needing to, and those other therapies are really important, but I think without the therapeutic relationship, change doesn't happen as we'd like it to happen. So I think that's probably a really important quality, and the barriers to our presence as therapists often include the things that we're talking about, our own conditioning, our own trauma, our own, like, to use the words of the Buddha spoke about, the people that have dust in their eyes. Like, we all have dust in our eyes. So how do we...
dusty place, this planet.
It's a really dusty place, this planet. So how do we kind of clear it out? And then we realize that we've got a bit more dust. But so I think that, doing that work is not just for ourselves, but it's for, it's for the people that we love and care about, including our clients.
Have you found that in your life? So how long ago was it that you kind of first came and started to practice and was introduced to mindfulness, would you say?
So, Mike, I think, probably if I go right back to yoga, I was quite young. I think there were kind of, when I was at uni, I remember sort of meeting people like from India, and there was a restaurant in Darlinghurst that was sort of like an introduction to to a world that was quite different for me. When I really started to develop my own practice was not until John Kabat-Zinn came, and because that part of that week was really to help us as therapists and health workers to understand that this work came through our own practices, that you couldn't actually do it without. So so look, it's been an on-off journey, as it is often, but I think what's probably in the last maybe for the last 10 years, it's been something that I know like has really guided my life, and the more that I've been able to sit and practice, the more subtle and the quicker the change is too, I think. And as we were saying, it still doesn't mean that that things are right all the time, but it just means that it's almost like you've got this place that you can keep coming back to. Trust is there, and I think that happens a lot more quickly too.
So in that journey, What would you say that it's been noticeable? Because you talked before about that this work that we're doing, if we're going to therapy, if we're learning to meditate and practicing mindfulness, understanding the Dharma, that it's creating a difference on the inside. But you also mentioned that it's sort of on-flowing out to your relationships. How would you say in that time period you've noticed a difference in the quality of your relationships?
Yeah, good question also. So like some profound changes, really profound changes where, you know, probably waking up to different patterns that you know went right back through the generations, and you know, like even probably understanding how those patterns show up. So yeah, and I think each time a bit of that dust clears, you realize how much more practice you have to do. So but I think like in terms of work, it has changed profoundly, I think, in areas like being able to listen more deeply, being able to, you know, when I think about it, it's probably more a matter of working from the heart rather than the head. And I have a real tendency to flip into my head a lot. So that's, yeah. So the challenge is, you know, to keep coming back into the body, and that's an ongoing practice, Mike. I think recognizing perhaps the quality of interaction rather than maybe even the quantity too is important, and having having an intention to connect from the heart rather than it being about anything else or having to be perfect, or you know, just that. I think that's been a really profound change too.
I have to say, I hadn't mentioned previously in the introduction, but I sat with Lisa through a retreat as part of it was the Charles Sturt University postgraduate certificate of applied mindfulness. And the thing that struck me most about Lisa in that experience was, I'm kind of speaking to listeners now, sorry Lisa, just that that was the exact way, like the authenticity of how you showed up. It was very much sort of, what's the best way to describe it? Maybe like a lack of pretense. Like it didn't feel like, it was kind of just like a very, I don't know, kind of like having a conversation with a wise auntie or something like that.
oh, thanks, Mike. Yeah,
very down to earth.
You know, and I think that's probably part of that way of working, that we're all, you know, we're all in it together rather than, you know, as a group. That was such a beautiful, it was a beautiful kind of experience. Sad that Charles Sturt aren't funding that course anymore.
For anyone that hears this and wants to go and do that, to go somewhere else. So I just have a sneak peek back at some of these ideas I thought we could talk about as well. So something that I think could be interesting to explore is, who is it for? So we mentioned that there's lots of different types of psychotherapies, and there's kind of like one for every type of person. Who would you say, if you were going to be referring a mindfulness-based type of therapy, what kind of representation would benefit from that most?
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to say every.
I knew you were going to say.
Yeah, you know, because it's funny, but even like I remember maybe about 5 years ago being approached to work with a family who had a child that was going through some major kind of gender issues, and I remember saying, no, you know, I can't, that's outside my area of expertise, Mike. And then I thought about it, and I because I had worked in family therapy, and I said to the family, look, I don't have experience with this particular issue, but what we could do is work from a family family therapy approach with mindfulness, where we're all practicing together, and where, you know, maybe you as parents consider coming and doing an 8-week course and establishing your own practice, so that we have a commonality of language to speak about, you know, things that arise. And, you know, it's just been the most beautiful journey with that family. So I mean, there are, you know, of course there are times when mindfulness is not appropriate, say for people that have acute presentations or psychosis, or even, you know, major depression. But, you know, even saying that, I think when we have our own practice, what we bring to working with people who are, you know, in severe stress may just be that quality of presence where we can hold a space that starts to feel safe. So I think look, my sense is in many ways, in particularly working with trauma, I think there's, you know, it's quite profound. But again, it's really important for the therapist to have their own practice and to have, you know, to have really solid training as well. Like, yeah,
absolutely. You made me think of there's the Buddhist story about you know, if I think it's something like, I'm going to misquote this here, sorry to very well versed Buddhists, but there's something about, you know, like the world is burning, and so we can either try and cover the whole world in leather, or we can just wrap leather around our feet, something like that.
Yeah.
And it kind of made me think of what you were saying in a slightly different way, like you know, even though there might be so much evidence out there now for anxiety and depression and all these different representations that mindfulness-based therapy is useful for. But in many ways, particularly the way that the Buddha presented everything, it's such a foundational way of teaching. It kind of cuts to what's underneath everything. And even if someone did have one of those more acute presentations you were referring to, maybe they could either be a mindfulness-based therapy in conjunction with something else, medication or a different type of program, or maybe even just that the therapist brings it in within themselves. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think that that's really important, and I think that, you know, the Dharma, like, which were the teachings of the Buddha, and the word Dharma is Sanskrit that, you know, translated means the universal natural laws of the cosmos. So you can be a Catholic and practice the Dharma. You can be, you know, like, you can be from any sort of spiritual background. So the Dharma, you don't have to be a Buddhist, but I think even like for someone, say, that's, you know, experiencing acute distress, you know, one of the universal truths is that everything is impermanent. So even that understanding that this moment, this suffering, this distress will pass, it's not permanent, you know, even so I guess that's like with it, that's arises from our own practice of understanding our own mind, that thoughts, feelings, anything that we experience through our senses is impermanent. And how, you know, how that shows up, it may not be as a teaching, say, to someone experiencing acute distress, but it's very much inherent in the presence that we bring, or, you know, the words that might be spoken.
It's quite an interesting teaching, and it's something like I've had the experience before bringing that forward into session or into group work. And it's when you express these ideas to some people that have heard them for the first time, sometimes I get struck by this feeling of, well, that's so obvious, you know, why would that be interesting or relevant or helpful for them? Kind of like I expect people to respond with, I know everything changes, and so what? And yet talking about it and just mentioning it and bringing it into the conversation almost every time, has this kind of like excitatory action to it, where people start, like, wheels start turning. It's like, yeah, right. And you can, you know, bouncing back to the different ways that might affect their lives or the inner process.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, and those shifts can be subtle, but you know, part of that awakening process where we start to wake up to the true nature of, you know, of reality. And a little bit like the story that you mentioned too about, and I'm not entirely sure about the exact details, but we live our lives like covering our, you know, whole external life in leather to protect ourselves, thinking that, you know, that we're going to live forever, thinking that we can control, you know, what goes on around us. But you know, and it's not until we experience often enormous suffering that we, you know, we're faced with actually there's nothing that we can control. And, you know, life, there is, you know, the truth of life is impermanence. And the truth is that there will be suffering as human beings too. So,
Yeah. You reminded me of in that retreat that we did, Malcolm Huxter came on and he talked about sort of spending a moment trying to stop thinking, or trying to think only one particular thing, or not think of something. And because a lot of people think that there is this agency and there's an influence that we have, but even when you come back to just the very dialogue in our own minds, we have so little agency over that.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. You know, yeah. And it's often even as part of this approach, understanding, you know, the nature of thought, like what actually is a thought and where do they come from, and contemplating, you know, those things that, you know, thoughts are natural kind of energetic movements of the mind, but it's, you know, our relationship with thoughts that, is really profound.
And we see that in CBT, right? So without any mindfulness or kind of Buddhist pretext, we got this therapy that's come through, massively evidence-based, utilized across a lot of areas. And then, and we're really just working with, you know, what is your relationship to your thoughts and what types of thoughts you're having. And that's kind of just one of the elements of mindfulness, isn't it? Being aware of the different ways that we've sort of perceive things.
Yeah, Mike, and you know, yeah, absolutely. And I think in, you know, one of the most powerful parts of mindfulness, which is really a medicine, is that awakening to the relationship that we have, say, with our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, and that recognizing that we, you know, we can make choices about what we pay attention to and what we let go of. Yeah. Somebody, I can't remember who it was, said that the Buddha was actually the original cognitive behavior therapist. I don't know if it might have been Mal. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, maybe, I'm not sure where exactly, maybe a few of them, but it kind of fits in as one of the parts of the Eightfold Path. But there's so much more, isn't there? But that's definitely a big part of it. And there's that famous quote, the mind is the forerunner of all things. So it's, you know, if we can address that, and that's really the context, isn't it? Because one of the next things that I was going to bring to mind is, you know, that sometimes you hear from some Buddhist circles that, you know, mindfulness isn't, like, psychotherapy isn't a Buddhist thing, or it doesn't really align with the fundamental philosophy of Buddhism. And then others, obviously there's mindfulness-based psychotherapy and different schools and types and versions of that, where you see great benefit and great result for people doing that. And it seems to me that it's kind of just around that particular point about our relationship to our thoughts. But maybe you could say a bit more around what, you know, it is, does psychotherapy fit in with mindfulness and Buddhism, without obviously just saying yes, but in what way, to those that doubt that?
Yeah. I think, yeah, it's, you know, it is really well. If we go back to, and I think Mal Huxter writes about this in his book, about that the Buddha, really was, he wasn't a religious figure.
Yeah.
He was really just like a brilliant human being that saw deeply into the nature of being human.
Hmm.
And it's just because it got tangled up in the religious aspect. I think some people went to Asia and saw people meditating and said that they must be Buddhists. So there's that aspect too of, it being seen to be a religious thing, when I think, I love that understanding of the Buddha as just someone just like Galileo or
Mm.
Leonardo da Vinci that had amazing insight. So I think often, Mike, I think a lot of those issues come up because, maybe people don't have an understanding into that world, and that there is some kind of preconceived, just like they just haven't been exposed,
Mm.
perhaps to the Dharma,
Mm.
and that's completely fine as well, because
Yeah.
there's so much space for everything. I think though, as therapists, it's a really wonderful practice for us to be able to cultivate all those qualities that we need to be present and to take care of ourselves as well. So
Mm.
I think that's where, yeah, I think if to have that conversation, and in Australia we have the Australian Association of Buddhist Counsellors and Psychotherapists.
Hmm.
It's a really wonderful organisation
Hmm.
supporting professional development, and just as a, like it's a sangha, like it's a group of people, a group of like-minded people that support each other. Yeah. Mm.
Beautiful. Yeah, I've had a look at that. I almost enrolled in that. That looks like a really great course that they're
Yeah.
offering there.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Mm.
Mm. Mm.
So another thing that I think could be interesting to kind of touch on is um, spiritual bypassing.
Mm.
So for some people that it kind of leads on from that question, because I think to some degree, and this is just talking from personal experience, kind
Mm.
of going along on a spiritual path or a personal development path, a path of self-discovery, and finding that sometimes doing things like having meditation practices or any sort of self-led practices or group practices, that sometimes it can leave certain aspects of development out that aren't there unless you're in relationship with someone. And there's this idea that there's like the therapist could be referred to as the fellow traveler. I can't remember which one it was that said that. Maybe that was Rogers, the fellow traveler. And then if you look at some of the Buddhist teachings around the teachers being like a friend, like a good friend in
Mm.
Tibetan Buddhism.
Mm.
Um, and I just wanted to kind of ask about your experience of spiritual bypassing and how therapy for someone that's a mindfulness or a meditation practitioner could help with that sort of experience of blocking off some of the insight or not seeing some of the behaviors.
Yeah, like, and I think that's where we really need each other, and us as therapists too, because because we, each moment kind of reveals things that we might not be aware of, and
Mm-hmm.
our conditioning, the causes and conditions for what's arising in the present moment. So I think the blind spots, so spiritual bypassing, yeah, as you mentioned, and as I understand it, is our inability to turn towards what is inherently too painful that, you know, sometimes our mind will protect us from.
Beautifully put.
But that's where, you know, I don't think in our culture we're not taught how to turn towards what's painful. So we do the best we can, and you know, sometimes that means drugs, alcohol, distraction, a whole range of things, workaholism. But ultimately, when we develop those skills and tools to be present for our own pain and suffering, that's when there can be like a really profound change, you know, in our therapeutic relationship with the people that we're working with. That actually helps us to transform, you know, empathy into compassion as well. It's a really important trajectory, but without those skills and tools, and you know, in the West, I think Tara Brach and Jack Cornfield and others from that era sort of called it the RAIN practice for working with difficulty. But that's such a beautiful practice for our Western minds to be able to recognize, allow, and accept, investigate what's going on in our body, and then Tara refers to it as nurture and non-identify. So it's like applying kind of the healing balm of self-compassion to our own pain, which that's such a profound shift. So, but without those skills and tools, we'll continue to spiritually bypass. And, you know, on a bigger level, when you look at many of the problems that we're facing in the world, which I love Indigenous people refer to it as, you know, yes, we're going through an ecological crisis, but at its heart is a spiritual crisis. I think, you know, at its heart is this inability to feel, you know, what is. So we keep, you know, building bigger, better, faster, spending more. You know, the people, like there are a whole lot of people that are extraordinarily wealthy, you know, spending a lot of money, thrusting themselves into outer space. But I mean, that still avoidance of, you know, actually of the moment of what's here, and avoidance of believing, you know, that we can keep transforming the kingdom in letter, you know, to protect ourselves from the ultimate reality of life, which is that we will die, and that pain is inevitable, and suffering is optional. That's
I like that. Pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. That's kind of the heart of the Buddhist philosophy.
Yeah.
Well put. Yeah, I think it's important, like you said, so therapists to be able to sort of take that journey, and which probably kind of, I'd say, speaks to the benefit of therapists receiving therapy and supervision as well.
Absolutely. And you know, I think working in this way, Mike, you know, is the essential to do like our own silent retreats too, just to keep kind of to keep awareness and refining, you know, and to be able to wipe the dust out of our eyes that continues to emerge through life, the vicissitudes of life. So silent retreats are essential as well.
So what would you say to someone that's maybe listening and thinking, am I spiritually bypassing? What, is there something that I'm not seeing? What would you recommend? How would you know if you were spiritually bypassing? Are we all doing it?
I think, you know, like I think we can easily, it's usually when there's attachment to things being a certain way, or aversion to not wanting to, you know, to experience like things in the moment that are incredibly painful. A beautiful friend of mine, we facilitated a lot of mindfulness groups together a few years ago when I was stuck in my own reactivity. She reminded me, she said, Lisa, this is gold. You will never get an opportunity to practice like this again. Go and sit on your mat. And it took her just reminding me to, that's right. Like, because our reactivity is so great, Mike, that, and that I think, well, that's been my experience too, that, it's, yes, there will be moments when we're stuck in reactivity, but maybe it starts to be a little bit faster, that we recognize those moments in ourselves and those seeds of what the Buddha referred to as the 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. Maybe we can choose more to cultivate the 10,000 joys and to work effectively with the 10,000 sorrows so that they're not overtaking our lives. Yeah.
So I guess that's noticing, like you said, reactivity, that you're kind of saying, if you notice reactivity there, actually, like you said before, turning towards. And if you do have those experiences as reactivity through your day and you're not turning towards, then that might be a sign that there's some spiritual bypassing going on.
Yeah, definitely.
Does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps noticing, what our particular habits of aversion and attachment might be. So if it is to have that extra glass of wine when you get home from work, why are you having the wine? Are you having it to relax and to feel better? Or, just to, I think, the awareness of that process, because, many of those things work in the short term, but in the longer term, they actually don't, and that's when they start to impact our health on all of those levels: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual as well. So.
Yeah, when we do those things kind of unconsciously and in a way where it's in avoidance of actually feeling and dealing with something.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I often talk about kind of, the emotional response that we're having is, it's a communication system, so that we know that there's something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Beautiful. That's really beautiful. And to see it like that means that we're grateful for those things being messengers that give us the opportunity to come back to the moment, to see what's there on a deeper level, and then to skillfully work with what it is. I guess they say that we spend 47% of our time like not actually present in our own lives. So part of that process is that waking up so that we can make those choices earlier, before things reach a level where they might be damaging our personal relationships or our health.
Kind of startling, isn't it? That half of our life we're not even there for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, if there's ever a motivator to actually sit down and meditate and do this work.
Yeah.
Because life's short as it is, let alone take away half of it.
Yeah.
And I know we've covered a lot of sort of really useful, important things, and we'll probably wrap up fairly soon. But I was just thinking, is there anything that you would say to offer for listeners to take away that could be useful, could be valuable?
Look, just that a way, I think, to think of the importance of the practice and the Dharma in the times that we're living through. And the times that we're living through are demanding of all of us that we be the best versions of ourselves that we possibly can be. That I think mindfulness plays a huge role in being able to bring about change in all of the areas that we need to really step up and bring about change in social and environmental injustice, so that that we are leaving a legacy for future generations. So I think there's a real urgency, Mike, for us to get our stuff together, to clear the dust out of our eyes, and to recognize that as human beings, we have this extraordinary capacity to make a choice. And I just wrote down this quote of Viktor Frankl's from his book Man's Search for Meaning, that the last of the human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's way.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, that's beautiful. And a great way to finish, with that sense of, if not now, then when. It's kind of here we are. Yeah, beautiful. So there's a few little sort of wrapping up things that we can mention here. I just wanted to say one thing was that if you want to get in touch with Lisa and any of the wonderful offerings that she has, her website is www.mindfulnesspsychologywellbeing.com. And I'm going to be putting in links to your website and also a list of offerings you've got up and coming. Maybe you could speak to those a little bit now. You've got some retreats coming up.
Yeah, sure. So we've got some retreats. We've got 2 retreats at Sangsurya called The Medicine of Mindfulness that are
Beautiful.
One's coming up in January, one's May, and one's September. We have also, there are 2 silent retreats that are led by Mal Huckster, and I'm supporting him with those. And those retreats, one is online at the end of February, and the other one is face-to-face and online in September. And we're also running mindfulness-based stress reduction groups, Mike, and one particularly for first responder trauma that we've adapted, myself and Kate Duncan, and that will be online. So we're really excited about that work because there's such a need to support our first responders. So
beautiful. Such sort of abundant set of offerings you got going on there, and they all sound like they'd be worthwhile showing up to and engaging with. So thanks for sharing that.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah, absolutely. And in case you're just listening to this in your car or whatever, I'll have it on the links on the website so that you can go back and check those out if you're interested. So yeah, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about today's podcast, or would like to suggest a topic next time, or a question or a host, then please email me at mike@michaelvaccaro.com.au. It's been an absolute honor having you here, and a joy as well. And it's really good to see you. So thanks again, Lisa.
Thanks, Mike. It's been such a pleasure and lovely to see you again and hear of your wonderful journey, with mindfulness too. So thank you.
Thank you so much.